Hi, my name is Lindsay. I wanted to come on here and tell my birth stories. It has been really healing for me to listen to birth stories as I process my own, so just wanted to put mine out there. So both of my births were home birth cesareans, which means that I planned out of hospital births and they both ultimately ended up needing to be born by C-section, both of my daughters. So that was in August of 2020, my daughter Maeve was born, and then this year, earlier in April of 2022, my daughter Juniper was born, and that was a CBAC, which stands for cesarean birth after cesarean, which just means instead of scheduling a repeat C-section, you go for a VBAC and still need a C-section. So both of my pregnancies, I received care from an amazing group of out-of-hospital midwives. Their credentials are certified professional midwife, or CPMs, and they provide the prenatal, birth, and postpartum care. So I plan to have them attend my birth center birth the first time around and my home birth the second time around. So I'm going to start here with the story of my first daughter Maeve's birth, and then I'm going to do a second video for my daughter Juniper's birth after that. So going back to 2020, you think COVID, that was very much a part of this whole experience. My pregnancy was good, no complications, and my due date was August 7th. On August 6th, I had gone through the morning and I noticed my daughter wasn't moving as much as normal, so my midwife sent me to the hospital for a non-stress test. That all checked out fine. They did determine I was having regular practice contractions, but I knew that may or may not mean anything. So I ended up losing my mucus plug later in that day, and I still knew that could be a while. Went to bed, woke up around midnight with painful contractions. They weren't in a regular pattern. Sometimes they would come 5-10 minutes apart, sometimes it would be 20. So my sleep was really broken up by the morning. I was pretty sick of it. It was painful. I wasn't well rested, and I knew the importance of being well rested for labor, so I wanted to be able to rest. I had my due date appointment that day, and my midwife determined that at a cervical exam that I was closed, not soft. So that was really discouraging because I hoped that evening was for something. So went through all that day. The contractions kept coming. Sometimes I'd get an hour in between. Sometimes it was every 10 minutes. Going into that night, I was just hoping labor would kick in, but it was another night of the same thing. My midwife had been concerned about my daughter's position at that due date appointment, and I don't think that I fully appreciated baby position and how important it was. I got it, but I was just whatever, babies will come out. Why do they have to be on a certain side? But they have to be on that left side, ready to go, and I've never had a baby get in that LOA position. So this was probably my body trying to turn her. So August 8th, I woke up. That was actually my birthday, so we thought, okay, let's have a birthday twin. Let's do this. I had another night of not great sleep. So I tried to nap through the day, and then we would try to like rotate with rest and walking to get things going. Later in the afternoon, we had some walks where I would have regular minute-long contractions every 5 minutes. They were painful. This was really good memories. Think back to actually these walks. We went to a park, and we were by a waterfall, and there was a railing, and I would just hold on to that for contractions, and the waterfall was just such a nice noise to lean into. So that was really nice to be able to do. And we thought, like, all right, we did an hour walking, and that pattern went on, and we went back home. We're like, all right, let's get ready to go. And I was like, I'm gonna go sit on my yoga ball, listen to some music, and just see if things slow down. And they did. And I knew that meant that wasn't real labor. So very discouraged at this point. I was like, I'm done hoping. Like, I just need to like stop thinking labor's gonna happen. It was hard because my mom was staying with us, and my dad or my husband were excited. And I just said, I do not want to do another night of this. I need you guys to take shifts with me. So my husband started the first shift staying up with me the night. I took a bath, we watched a movie, went to lay in bed, maybe rested a little bit, and around midnight I woke up with very painful, different contractions. And I don't even know that in my mind, I didn't even think, oh, this is active labor now. I just thought something's wrong. Like, all of this means that something, this couldn't be active labor, with how painful this is in my cervix, particularly. Like, I felt like just something was jabbing into my cervix, and I was just literally screaming for a couple hours. I was leaning over, like laying on the bed, leaning into my pregnancy pillow and just screaming into it. And I wanted to go to the ER, even though I know I couldn't physically get myself out of the bed. We had been bothering my midwives all of these days of prodromal labor, so we didn't want to call them again until we like knew something was different. And I was like, all right, we gotta call them. Like, I don't even think this is real, but like something is different. And we called them, and the midwife was in denial that I could be in labor, because they just thought that I would have this prodromal labor for a while, and lots of first-time moms like don't go into labor right on time. But she was kind of in shock, and she was like, okay, I think that what's happening is you're phasing pretty quickly. That is not comfortable, and I'm gonna send the on-call midwife over. So she got there around 4 a.m. And I was so relieved when she got there, and she did an exam, and I was 7 centimeters. And that was just like such relief. Like, okay, this 4 hours of pain I've been having is labor, not just false labor. And I just remember everything felt so soft, like jello down there when she did the cervical exam. And I was like, all right, like I could get a baby out through that. So started to feel hopeful, excited. And then she was like, so are we having a home birth? And I was like, what? We're that close? Like, no, we didn't plan for a home birth. We had just moved into the house, so we stuck with the birth center birth. And I was like, I need to get out of this room. So she went ahead of us to get the tub going at the birth center and get everything opened up, and we followed behind. I just waited at the car for my mom and husband to pack up, threw my robe on. I don't even remember that drive there, really. It was dark, and we got to the birth center, and I was so relieved to see the tub filled up. And my midwife was like, all right, I think we need to do some spinning baby circuits before you get in the tub, because she knew that my daughter was posterior. And I was like, okay, whatever. I didn't really want to. I didn't really think it would do much. I just thought my baby was going to be in the position she was going to be. So we did that, and then I got in the tub. That was great. I wish I had photos of this. I don't have photos of any of this birth. My husband was in the tub with me. I just can think back to that time. That was the best part of this labor. It was calm. The water provided me so much relief, and my contractions had shifted to more normal in my stomach contractions. Still pretty painful back labor because she was posterior. But it was so nice in the water to feel buoyant and be able to, I felt so stuck on the bed having contractions, and in the water you can just move and you don't have gravity working against you to move your body exactly how you need. After I started to feel a little pushy, my midwife called it, and I asked if I could push through contractions. She said, you can bear down a little bit. So I kind of did that. I guess that's something with posterior labor that can happen. You can feel a little pushy early. So after a while, she kept bothering me to pee. She wanted me to pee in the tub. We tried to get out and pee on the toilet, and I didn't get why she was bothering me about it, but she knew how full my bladder probably was, and that could be obstructing her from coming down. And then she suggested that we do some more circuits, which was awful at that point. I had been snacking on stuff, but I was just starting to get so exhausted from not having rested well these past few nights, and I was starting to get nauseous, probably starting to transition because she checked me after the circuits and I was a 9. So I was definitely in that transitional phase. We did these circuits and I was just shaking and crying, and my husband and midwife and mom were just holding me up basically to do these circuits. I ended up just getting into the bed, laying there. We did some different, she would reposition me, and I was starting to lose hope. She did explain that we could see when I had a contraction that my bladder was a separate bump from my baby. You could see how full my bladder was during the contraction. So she said, offered to straight calf me and empty out my bladder, and I agreed. There was a ton of urine that came out, way more than normal. So she was like, well, that might be it. Your baby might be able to get through now. That wasn't it. I think around this point it was 9 a.m. and she was like, all right, you need to eat something. I really didn't want to eat, but they went to make pancakes, and my husband laid in the bed with me, and I just was crying and losing control at this point, and I was like, I'm done. I just kept saying, I'm done. This is the point where we always talked about. We would just go to the hospital. There's got to be something next. And I was asking for nitrous through this time, but that they were supposed to have at the birth center, but I think it might have been broken or they were out because that was never brought to me. Around 10, my midwife came in, and I had already discussed my husband going to the hospital, and she said, so I think, we've reached the point where we might want to start talking about transfer. And I was like, yep, I was going to say the same thing. So that was an easy decision. She called the hospital, start getting that set up. And that was the longest wait of my life. Just I felt like no one was in a rush, and I was just waiting there. So done being there, needing some relief. And we finally got to the car. We chose to drive instead of get an ambulance. I just didn't want to make it a whole thing. So we drove. My contractions were spacing out a bit at this point. And we got to hospital. They brought me down. Because of COVID, this is like the biggest part COVID played, where my midwife wasn't even technically supposed to come into the hospital with me, which normally during a transfer they would become your doula in the hospital. And I was really, really bummed that I didn't have that. And for some reason, we didn't utilize them for our virtual support of any kind. I don't really know why. I just didn't really have a plan for transfer. My mom had easy births, so I assumed my birth would just kind of happen. So, but they did let her come in and for an hour or two and get me settled in, and she was with me through the epidural. I was still a 9. The midwife at the hospital was awesome. She was my midwife's favorite. She was a little more like crunchy, natural. So she was concerned about my daughter's suture lines that she could feel on the cervical exam that showed that she was posterior and acynclitic. So their chins should be like tucked in order to enter in the pelvis, and hers was kind of like this because she had her hand up by her face, is what we ended up finding out. So got that epidural. That was amazing. That was a very long wait, it felt like, to get it. And I got to rest. I really wanted to eat. I was hungry, but I had a ton of juice to try to fuel myself. After a while, my contractions started to space out because I was laying down, and they were doing all of the like peanut ball, rotating me, spinning baby stuff. They were great with that. And they offered Pitocin, explained that could help get the contractions going, get her turned. So I consented, and I just had a really low dose, I think like a 4. And I fell back asleep and woke up to my waters bursting across the room, and I thought that I had peed myself. So I thought that the catheter had fallen out and I had peed. So I was embarrassed to call, but they were excited to say, oh, that was your waters. And so we were like, all right. I just thought, okay, like things are gonna happen. My husband was napping in another room, so he's a really heavy sleeper, so it took a while to get him back in the room, which was a little stressful. But he eventually came, and we were like waiting for things to happen, and they weren't. At some point this time, my midwife did another cervical check, I think soon after my water broke, and like from the pressure of her head on my cervix, it had swelled a bit, so I was like at an 8. And so we just kind of waited. I was getting really nervous about how exhausted I felt, mostly from not eating. Like I had gotten to sleep some, but my body was just so fatigued from having contractions for days, and I just felt like I couldn't push. Like I was like, how am I possibly going to be able to push like this? And they just reassured me, you know, it can take a bit to push, especially with baby in a not as ideal position. So I was kind of like, all right, well, I felt pretty overwhelmed about that, and I think that they sensed that, and we're getting a little nervous. So around like 6 p.m., my daughter started to have some early, and particularly the concern was late decels. They were recovering, but that was kind of starting to be a sign that she could be not tolerating things well, especially with the Pitocin going. So I knew at that time when they started talking about that, that C-section was going to be offered as the next step. So I started to prepare myself for that and prepare my husband when they left the room. And I was pretty open to it at that point. I felt like I had done everything that I could in this labor, and I wanted my daughter to be born well. So that was priority. So the OB came in. It was a new shift at this point, which ended up being good because apparently the daytime OB wasn't awesome, and this was great. So she came in and said, like, this is what's going on. A C-section is a good next option, but we can keep going. We can take it hour by hour and just monitor her closely, and just see if she can descend. She was still she did another cervical exam, and I was back at a 9, 90% ephased, and -1 station, which is still high. And she was high up because of her posterior position, and she ended up having a 100th percentile head almost, and the hand up by her face, and she ended up having nuchal cord ×2, I think. So she was just stuck up there. So I understood that if we kind of had a C-section when things were more chill, it could be a more chill C-section, and that was important to me at that point because my mind started to shift to breastfeeding. That was always my biggest priority in any of this. Having a baby was for breastfeeding to go well, and I wanted to be able to nurse her on right away, has skin to skin. They assured me that we can do that right now. So we went into the C-section. My husband was able to be there because it wasn't an emergency. That was pretty overwhelming once we agreed to the C-section. This was a smaller hospital, community hospital, so they didn't have 24-hour OR staff, so they had to call everyone in, and then once everyone got there, it was just like go time, and everyone was coming in the room, introducing themselves, explaining what was happening, and that was really overwhelming to me. They were giving me medication, an antacid that ended up making me throw up. They had to COVID swab me at that point for some reason. And I went into surgery pretty out of it. I had to ask for anxiety meds to stay with it. On the OR table, I felt like the anxiety, like I kept having to ask for more anxiety meds. I felt like I couldn't breathe, even though they reassured me like my oxygen sat was good and everything. But yeah, and it's pretty quick once they get the baby out pretty quick. And I had the clear drape, and they lifted her up. I just remember her being lifted up into the air, and it was just so amazing, like that there was a baby, like she was in me. Like I don't think I could conceptualize that fully. Like she was our baby, and we both just sobbed. And they did a quick delayed cord clamping, cleaned her up, brought her over to me. And we did skin to skin. She nursed right away. And then after a bit, they were closing me up, and I started to get like really shaky. So I had to give her back to my husband, and yeah, and then they were finally done, came back out to recovery, and I was nursing her more, and I barely could stay awake. And I asked my husband, I was like, I want to nurse her. She wants to nurse. This is important right now. And so he just sat beside the bed and like helped support her so she could nurse, and I could kind of wake up. And I just kept saying, I don't want to be sleepy like this. Like I want to be awake. I want to be awake for these first moments I have with her. So managed to stay mostly awake, and the meds finally wore off. And the next morning they came in getting me out of bed. She was up all night nursing, and I was surprised at how fast they want you to walk after a C-section. So they got me walking, and it was a great hospital stay. Breastfeeding went relatively smooth, and she's still nursing sometimes to this day. She loves nursing, and that's been really healing, to have that go really well. And they explained to me in the hospital right away that I was a really good VBAC candidate, and I was like, yeah, obviously I'm having a VBAC. And my midwives did postpartum care. They came to the house, and we had lots of visits to talk about my birth, and it was a pretty good postpartum experience after that, and I just remained hopeful for a VBAC and just knew that the reasons that I had the C-section were pretty valid. I never thought that babies just wouldn't descend, but this is real. She was persistently posterior, and her head was all tilted and caught up, so she just couldn't navigate my pelvis. So yeah, and I will go into the next video, fast forward a couple of years to my second daughter being born. But thank you so much for listening.